Hey guys, it's Snowflake. A little while ago I posted a video where I analyzed the history of Pixie Hollow. I'll put that in the description. I highly recommend you watch that one before continuing on because this video will mainly be a continuation. So the reason why I'm making a second video is because I recently found out, wait for it please, the exact years the Tinkerbell movies took place in.
What?
Now, it may sound really strange. Well, it's just a guess and it's not at all canon, but it would help us find additional info to add to our timeline. So how do we know the year? Well, it's all based on the blue harvest moon, which is the one that makes the blue pixie dust. In Tinkerbell and Lost Treasure, Terrence said the blue moon rises every 8 years. In Pixie Hollow, the blue moon rose in 2009. Now, the Pixie Hollow online world didn't take place in 2009. It took place in the late 1800s, around the time the movies took place, as I said so in my last video. But I've always assumed that 2009 was a blue moon year. So if we know the blue moon rises every 8 years, we can find out the other years the blue moon has risen. Yeah, it's a stretch, but it's the best we've got. So here's a list of the years a blue moon has risen until 1800. We can use this to find out which year Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure took place. So in my last video, I guessed that Peter Pan took place in 1904 because that was when the book was written and it would be a reasonable year. All the Tinkerbell movies, including Lost Treasure, took place before that year. However, Wendy was alive in the first movie, which I'm pretty sure took place before Lost Treasure, and I've always assumed that Wendy was about 12 in Peter Pan, or at least close to that age. With that evidence, we know the movies likely took place in the 1890s. The year of the blue moon, the year on the blue moon list in the 1890s is 1897, so I'm pretty sure that's when Lost Treasure takes place. I've always thought the first movie took place in the spring before Lost Treasure, but in Pixie Hollow, Tinkerbell's arrival day party was held in the fall before the revelry. This brings me the question whether or not Pixie Hollow connects to real time. For example, 2008 would be the in-game equivalent of 1896, and 2009 would be 1897, and so on. Well, according to the Secret of the Wings Junior novelization, it's not true. It said Great Fairy Rescue happened, quote-unquote, this past summer, meaning it took place the summer before Secret of the Wings. In Pixie Hollow, the Great Fairy Rescue event happened an entire year before the Secret of the Wings event. So Pixie Hollow doesn't really follow the timeline rule, so it could be possible that the first movie happened in 1897, the same year as Lost Treasure. And I think it's a reasonable age because if Wendy was 12 in 1904 like I guessed, she would be 5 in 1897, which I find to be a reasonable age, especially since she lost a music box for at least a year before the first movie. So with that info, as well as info from the first part, the first movie happened in the spring of 1897, Lost Treasure happened in the fall of 1897, Great Fairy Rescue happened in the summer of 1898, and Pixie Hollow Games and Secret of the Wings happened in the fall of 1898. But what about the other two movies? Well, as for the Pirate Fairy, the minimum year it can take place in is 1900. The reason is because the beginning of this movie mentioned the events of Secret of the Wings, and the Four Seasons Festival happened a year later. The Disney Fairies Wiki says the Four Seasons Festival takes place in the spring, which is a reasonable season, so the majority of the Pirate Fairy took place during that season. The beginning of the movie likely took place in the spring after Secret of the Wings, so the 1 year later thing from the beginning might not be exact, but it's safe to assume that the beginning of the Pirate Fairy took place in the spring. But wait, if the border crossing was legalized when Secret of the Wings took place and the Four Seasons Festival when the Winter Fairies came was over a year after Secret of the Wings, you assume that the Winter Fairies would come to the Four Seasons Festival this spring right after Secret of the Wings when the beginning of the Pirate Fairy was supposed to take place, Well, according to what I just said, the Pirate Fairy, can't be the spring after the Secret of the Wings. It has to be a year after. So I think the reason they waited to invite the Winter Fairies is because in Secret of the Wings, the snowmaker that's used to welcome fairies to the warm seasons wasn't the most reliable and trustworthy, so I guess Tink spent the year fixing it. So I'm guessing the beginning part of the Pirate Fairy before the Four Seasons Festival took place in the spring of 1899, and the rest of the Pirate Fairy took place in the spring of 1900. As for Legend of the Never Beast, it's a difficult one because it doesn't really mention any mainland seasons or the Pirate Fairy or anything. My personal guess is that it's later in 1900 because it will be 4 years before my guess on when Peter Pan takes place. And I think it would be better to give Tink more time to come from Tinkery Pixie Hollow to explore Neverland where she eventually meets Peter. And I won't be surprised if they have known each other for at least a year before they met Wendy. So now that we have a guess on the year of Legend of the Never Beast, we can guess when Pixie Hollow became a part of Neverland. Because according to the Realm of the Never Fairies book, Pixie Hollow wasn't always a part of Neverland, so the Never Beast was a legend not many people knew about at the time of the movie, and even Queen Clarion doesn't know much about it. I'm guessing that Pixie Hollow became part of Neverland after Gruff protected the Millennial Storm the previous time. Because if Pixie Hollow was in Neverland 1,000 years before Legend of the Never Beast, then fairies wouldn't be as worried as they believed the Never Beast destroys Pixie Hollow, yet it's still standing. Sure, there was drawing of the Never Beast to the library, but it could have been drawn to another inhabitant of Neverland, as Neverland is home to many. So if the Never Beast came approximately 1,000 years before 1900, then it would happen around the 900s AD, so Pixie Hollow first became part of Neverland after that. And by the way, in case you're wondering when the first Pixie Hollow fairy was born, I'd say around ancient times, in human years of course. So now I'd like to talk about Queen Clarion. So there have been multiple queens before Clarion, according to the Realm of the Never Fairies book as well as some other books. Queen Clarion has been ruling over Pixie Hollow for a very long time, and she still seems to rule in the present era, as she was the queen in the Never Girls books, which I assume take place around 2013 when the books were published. So she obviously was the queen in 1897, meaning she was the queen for over 121 years. But that's not all. In the Pixie Hollow Bake-Off short, the head baking talent had been baking an arrival day cake for Ree for 400 years. I've assumed the Pixie Hollow Bake-Off short takes place in the late 1890s when the movies took place. So with that logic, Ree has been around since the 1400s in human years. And yes, I'm sure Ree has been ruling for around that long, because why would Gelada bake a fancy arrival day cake every year that she would frame for a normal fairy? Now just a brief reminder, you might be thinking that Queen Clarion is way too old, but Never Fairies do not age. It's just that they're not immortal. Okay, back to the theory. So it's very hard to be sure when Ree took the throne, but in her story in Secret of the Wings, she said that Lord Mallory crossed the border, quote-unquote, when Pixie Hollow was very young. In that time, she was able to set the rule that the warm seasons and the winter woods should remain apart, meaning she was queen when, quote-unquote, Pixie Hollow was very young. My personal guess is that the queen was talking about the Neverland version of Pixie Hollow, not the version outside of Neverland, because I'm sure there were several queens before Ree. My guess is that Pixie Hollow being part of Neverland was gradual, but it may have happened between 1000 AD and 1400 I mean. So what Ree shared in the movie was pretty vague, but I'm not going to dwell too much on Fairy Queens because that will be in another video, as I don't want this video to be way too long. But If I had to guess when Ree became the queen, it would, well, be after, I guess, Pixie Hollow became part of Neverland, maybe in like 13 or 1400s, I guess. Well, that's just my guess. So it's hard to be certain about many of the other events in Pixie Hollow's history. But the border crossing rule was after Ree became queen, maybe in the 1400s or 1500s, I'm guessing. Tink met Peter sometime between 1900 and 1903. The battle took place before the 1930s. I think it's the early 20th century because fairies seem to be used to Mother Dove in the books. Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg takes place between 1905 and the 40s. Return to Neverland took place in 1940 during the bombings of Britain. Fairies and the Quest for Neverland, I'm guessing, took place in 2010, the book publication date, because Wendy is one of Gwendolyn's ancestors and is not her grandmother. And I said earlier in this video that the Never Girls books likely happened in around the publication dates 2013 to 2015. As for many of the books, most of them were basically slice of life for the fairies. The only important one in the timeline really is The Trouble with Tink, which happened before 1940, as I said so in my last video, but all the books happened after Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg, and I won't be surprised if some of them occurred in the present. So thank you so much for watching this overwhelming video. I may or may not make a part 3, I don't know, but I hope you enjoyed watching this educational little Pixie Hollow history video. I know it's not the most, it's mainly just guesses, but hey, I just like finding the history of these types of things. So thank you so much for watching and fly with you later.